You ain't nothing but...
With over 10 million copies sold, Hound Dog is Elvis Presley's best-selling single. And by the time he recorded the song in July 1956, the original version from 4 years earlier had already spent 7 weeks at number 1 on the R&B charts. The song was so popular it spawned dozens of cover versions, response records, and sound-alike rip-offs. It was the subject of contractual disputes and copyright infringement cases, all before Elvis had apparently even heard the song. The song was written in 1952 by the songwriting team of Jerry Leiber and Mike Stoller, who at the time were just 19 years old. They both originally came from the East Coast. Leiber was from Baltimore and Stoller from New York. They met in LA after their families relocated there. Although they were born only about 6 weeks apart, Mike Stoller had skipped a grade, so graduated high school a year ahead of Leiber. Jerry Leiber was already an aspiring songwriter and had a book full of song ideas. He just needed someone who could provide the music. He spotted Mike playing piano at a gig in East LA and asked the drummer for his number. The phone call that followed proved to be one of the most important moments in both their lives.
I had just started Los Angeles City College, and Jerry was in high school, and I got a phone call from somebody who said, is this Mike Stoller? I said, yes. He said, did you play a dance in East LA over the weekend? I said, yes. He said, you play the piano, right? I said, yeah. He said, and can you write notes on paper? I said, yes. He said, well, my name is Jerome Leiber. I write lyrics. How would you like to write songs with me? I said, no. He said, well, why not? I said, I don't like the songs I hear on the radio. He said, well, what do you like? So I said, well, I like Bartok, Stravinsky, Charlie Parker, and Thelonious Monk. And he said, well, nevertheless, I think we ought to meet. Nevertheless are the words that I remember that actually got me to be a songwriter.
After convincing him they should meet up, Jerry took his book of lyrics and paid Mike a visit at his house.
I knocked on his door, and he opened the door, and he stood there, and he stared at me for a good minute and a half. And I thought, what's wrong with this guy? He's slow-witted, you know, or he's stoned, or something. Something's wrong with this guy. Because his mouth was open, and he was staring at me. After a few minutes, I heard his mother from the kitchen say, Mike, why don't you invite your friend in? And he went, oh, yeah, come in. And I went in. And I had this book, this composition book under my arm. And he said, are those the songs in that book? I said, yes. He said, may I look at them? I said, sure. And I handed him the book, and he went over to the piano, and he opened the book, and he started to read the words, and he started to play. He started to play a blues with a rhythm pattern. And he started to sort of sing a little bit. And he said, these aren't songs. He said, these are blues. I mean, oh, these are blues songs. You know, this is not commercial stuff. He said, I love the blues. He said, this is great stuff. He said, I'll write with you, yeah. So we started writing that night.
Their shared love of rhythm and blues fueled their songwriting sessions, and it was only a few months later that they had their first commercial release, with a Jimmy Witherspoon recording of their song, Real Ugly Woman.
Well, she's a real ugly woman.
You got it, Daddy.
Don't see how she got that way.
2 years later, they scored their first R&B hit when Charles Brown released their composition Hard Times.
Hard time. Ooh, I feel so bad.
On August 12, 1952, rhythm and blues band leader Johnny Otis asked Leiber and Stoller to meet with an artist he was producing for the notorious Don Robey's Peacock Records. A young woman from Alabama whose deep, powerful singing voice had people touting her as the new Bessie Smith. She had signed with the label the previous year, but both singles she released failed to have the desired impact. Johnny Otis hoped the young songwriters would be able to write a hit song for her.
A woman named Big Mama Thornton, Willie Mae Big Mama Thornton. Mm-hmm. And she used to sing with Johnny Otis's band back in the early 50s. Johnny wanted us to write for her, and we went and saw her.
Saw her perform?
Yeah, she was a knockout.
Leiber and Stoller agreed to write her a song, and a deal was made that Otis would receive 1/3 share of that and any other song that they wrote for Otis or one of his artists. The song itself took less than 15 minutes to write, once they decided on a direction. And the following day they went into the studio, Radio Recorders Annex in Los Angeles, to record the song. In the rehearsal, Johnny Otis was playing the drums. But when it came to record the track, the band's drummer, Leiber Bell, took over, as Otis was going to produce the record, so he would be needed in the control room to run the session. Bell was a skilled drummer, but just wasn't getting the same groove that Otis had in the rehearsal. So Leiber and Stoller asked Otis to record the drums himself. "Who's going to run the session?" he asked. "You two? The kids are going to run the session?" "Sure," replied Stoller. "The kids wrote it, let the kids do it." And so just like that, Leiber and Stoller became record producers. At first, the young producers weren't happy with Thornton's vocals, as she was singing the song in a much smoother style than she had in the rehearsal, and certainly wasn't capturing the powerful performance that impressed them so much the previous day. Jerry Leiber tried to instruct the singer to give the type of performance they'd envisioned, but at first she objected to a Jewish kid from New York telling her how to sing the blues. Eventually, Leiber sang the song himself to explain what he meant, and although he wasn't the best singer, Thornton was able to understand the style they wanted, and just 2 takes later, Hound Dog was recorded.
You ain't nothing but a hound.
At the time, Willie Mae Thornton was touring with another act on Peacock Records, Johnny Ace. So not long after the Hound Dog session, she was back on the road again.
We went to Los Angeles, and while I was there, we recorded Hound Dog, but Don Robey put it on the shelf.
It would be around 6 months before the single was finally released, although they didn't tell the artist her song was out. Instead, she heard it on the radio on the way to perform a gig at a theatre in Dayton, Ohio.
I was going to the theater, and I just turned the radio on in the car. And the man said, "Here's a record that's going nationwide. Hound Dog by Willie Mae Thornton." I said, "That's me." I hadn't heard the record in so long.
When she arrived at the theatre, they were playing the record over the PA system, so she went to the control room and asked them to play it a few more times so she could remember the words.
So that evening, I sang it on the show, and everybody went for it. So Hound Dog just took off like a jet.
What had held up the release of the single was a series of contractual disagreements regarding who wrote the song, who was the publisher, and therefore who would receive the revenue from the song. Hound Dog was originally written on plain paper and was just words, no music was written. It was left to Big Mama Thornton to come up with much of the melody she sang, and she also added some of her own words and adjusted the structure and arrangement. She thought that she should get some songwriting credit for her contribution, but Leiber and Stoller disagreed, and on August 30th, 1952, a contract was signed between Mike Stoller, Jerry Leiber, and Johnny Otis's Spin Music Publishing Company. This assigned the rights to Hound Dog and some other songs to Spin Music, with the 3 parties each getting an equal 1/3 share as per their prior agreement. Nevertheless, on September 9th, 1952, just over 3 weeks after it was written and recorded, a copyright application for Hound Dog was lodged with the US Copyright Office on behalf of Peacock Records owner Don Robey, with Willie Mae Thornton and Robey listed as the composers. On October the 10th, despite already signing the song to Spin Music, Johnny Otis signed another publishing deal for the rights to Hound Dog, this time with Lion Music, the affiliated publisher for Robey's Peacock Records. The contract also had the purported signatures of Leiber and Stoller. However, an executive at Lion Music noticed that the signatures of Leiber and Stoller were remarkably similar to the way Johnny Otis had signed his name, so they decided to contact the writing duo directly. And they denied they had signed the document. They said that Johnny Otis didn't have the right to sign on their behalf. They also stated that while they agreed to give Otis 1/3 of the revenue from the composition, he was not a writer of the song. Based on this new information, Lion Music drew up a new contract that didn't include Otis as a writer, and Leiber and Stoller signed this deal. But this would not be the end of the disputed ownership of this song and the legal battles that surrounded it. In February 1953, Peacock Records released Big Mama Thornton's recording of Hound Dog, and all the copies they pressed sold out immediately. 96,000 copies were shipped to stores around the USA in the first week alone, and another 55,000 were on order. Don Robey had to buy 3 more vinyl presses just to keep up with the demand. By the middle of April, it was the best-selling rhythm and blues song in the US, both in stores and jukeboxes. Even with over 500,000 copies sold, Peacock Records boss Don Robey was not happy. He felt it should have sold even more copies, and he's probably right. Once it was clear how popular Hound Dog was, other labels wanted to cash in, and within a few weeks the first of many cover versions started to appear. Here's a selection of some of the recordings of Hound Dog released in the 2 months following the release of the original.
You ain't nothing but a hound dog. Been snooping around the door. You ain't nothing but a hound dog. Quit snooping around the door.
You ain't nothing but a hound dog. Been a snooping around my door.
You can wag your tail, but I ain't gonna feed you no more.
You told me you was high class. I can see through that.
You told me you was high class. I can't see through that. I done and already found out that you ain't a real cool cat. You ain't nothing but a hound dog. Been snooping round my door.
As the owner of the composition, through his Lion Music publishing company, Don Robey earned money from all the various cover versions. What bothered him were the blatant sound-alikes and rip-offs that were obviously based on Hound Dog but didn't credit the original writers. Many of these sound-alikes were answer records. Answer songs were common in those days as a way of capitalising on the success of a popular song while trying to avoid giving any money to the writers of the original. Sometimes the answers were completely different, with the only similarities being in the title and the general theme. Sometimes they were basically rip-offs, with the same melody and very similar lyrics. One answer record that followed hot on the heels of the original fell into the latter category.
You ain't nothing but a bear cat. Been scratching at my door.
After hearing Hound Dog, Sam Phillips, the founder of Sun Records in Memphis with whom Elvis was signed at the time, quickly rewrote the lyrics to the same melody, but this time from a male perspective, and he called the new song Bearcat. This was a slang term popular in the 1920s, meaning a hot-blooded or fiery woman. He invited singer and local radio DJ Rufus Thomas to record the track for his label, that at that time was barely a year old. The combination of the growing hype around Hound Dog, which by this time was racing up the R&B chart, and Rufus Thomas' celebrity status in the region, catapulted the song to number 3 on the R&B chart and gave Sam Phillips' label its first hit. Don Robey attempted to contact Sam Phillips to come to an arrangement over Bearcat, but all his calls and letters were ignored. So, with both recordings still high on the R&B charts, Robey took Sam Phillips and Sun Records to court. It proved to be an open and shut case, as it was quite clearly the same melody, with substantially similar lyrics, and Sam Phillips had registered the song as a new composition, with himself as the sole writer, an obvious bad faith action. The court ruled in favour of Don Robey and ordered Sun Records to pay a percentage of sales to Lion Music, equivalent to the amount they would have had to pay had they released a direct cover of Hound Dog. Sam Phillips would also no longer be credited as writing Bearcat, and all future copies would credit Leiber and Stoller. They were also ordered to pay all of the court fees. The final bill is reported to have run into the tens of thousands and put the newly formed label on the brink of bankruptcy. After paying the settlement, Sam Phillips was unable to pay royalties he owed to many of his artists, including $5,000 to Elvis alone. It's thought that it's the repercussions of this case that eventually led Sam Phillips into selling Elvis Presley's contract to RCA in 1955 for $35,000. That's the equivalent of around $350,000 in today's money. RCA also agreed to pay Elvis the $5,000 that Sun Records owed him. It's kind of ironic that 8 months after leaving Sun Records, Elvis would record a version of the same song for his new label. In the 2022 Elvis biopic directed by Baz Luhrmann, it's implied Elvis heard Hound Dog being performed by Willie Mae Thornton at Club Handy on Beale Street in Memphis.
You ain't nothing but a hound dog with snooping around my house.
While it's true that Elvis did often visit Club Handy and other venues on Beale Street, Thornton wasn't the inspiration behind Elvis covering Hound Dog, and it's not actually her version he was copying. I think this is the movie makers trying to acknowledge the original artist who performed it. They don't specifically show Elvis in the audience at her performance. Instead, he's shown in the street outside the venue while Big Mama Thornton, portrayed by Sean Kadukere, sings the song near an open window.
Well, the original song that was written for Big Mama Thornton was written about, it was the story of a woman kicking a sponger out of her house. And the original lyric was different. It was, you ain't nothing but a hound dog, quit snooping around my door. You can wag your tail, but I ain't gonna feed you no more. Now, when she did the song, and it was kind of it was a hit. It was a big rhythm and blues hit. Then it was covered by some lounge acts, and they changed the words. And Presley heard a lounge act with the changed words, with Rabbit, and he cut that version.
The version that Elvis actually heard, that inspired him to do his own, was by Freddie Bell and the Bellboys.
You ain't nothing but a hound dog, crying all the time.
They'd recorded a version for the newly formed Teen Records in 1955. The co-founder of Teen Records, Bernie Lowe, had heard Big Mama Thornton's version, along with all the covers and sound-alikes, and thought that the song could have a much wider appeal if it was sung by a white singer and if some of the song's sexual innuendos were toned down.
So here we go with Freddie Bell and the Bellboys.
Freddie Bell and the Bellboys had a local hit with their rewritten version in the Philadelphia area, and on the back of that they were able to book a residency at the newly opened Sands Hotel in Las Vegas. Hound Dog had become a regular in their sets in Vegas. It was at one of these shows that Elvis heard Freddie and the Bellboys performing the song. Elvis met with Freddie Bell after one of their shows and asked for a copy of the single as he was planning to release his own recording. Freddie tried to use the knowledge of the forthcoming Elvis single to his advantage, but his new label, Mercury, were too slow to act.
So Elvis was really nice, and he loved Hound Dog. He loved the song. I got one of my 45, took it to Colonel Parker, gave it to Colonel Parker, and said, this is for Elvis. And they got to New York, 4 weeks later, they recorded it. Meanwhile, thinking I'm an astute businessman, I call Chicago Mercury Records, who I was recording for, and I talked to the A&R man. I said, Elvis is going to do Hound Dog. I said, get ours out and we'll pick up some of the, what they call tail sales. You know what I mean? You pick up some of the sales along with his. If they don't have his, you buy yours. Well, they waited 8 weeks. In 8 weeks, Elvis already sold like 6 million.
By the time Elvis came to record his version on July 2nd, 1956, he'd performed it live 21 times, including 2 TV performances. The first on the Milton Berle Show was considered too sexual and sparked the first of many controversies in his career. It also earned him the nickname Elvis the Pelvis.
Yes, sir, here he is, the new singing sensation all over the country, Elvis Presley. You ain't nothing but
Elvis had been booked for another TV appearance on The Steve Allen Show prior to the Milton Berle Show being broadcast, but after all the negative press, Steve Allen was getting pressure to cancel the appearance. In his introduction, the host made reference to the performance on the Milton Berle Show and described Elvis' appearance on his show as a comeback, and then introduced his guest as the new Elvis, who emerged dressed in a top hat and tails and was made to perform his song to a basset hound, also wearing a top hat. Something he was seemingly unaware of until it was too late to object. Elvis did his best to act like he was in on the joke, but must have been fuming inside.
You ain't nothing but a hound dog.
The very next day, after the humiliating appearance, Elvis went into the studio and recorded a version much angrier than the way he'd been performing it up until that point. But unlike Big Mama Thornton's version that only took 2 takes, Elvis and his band made 31 attempts, and it was take 28 that was eventually used. The single was released less than 2 weeks later and was an almost instant hit. It topped both the country and the R&B charts simultaneously. Mike Stoller was on holiday in Europe when Elvis recorded and released Hound Dog, and he didn't find out until he returned to New York. Jerry Leiber wanted to be the one to break the news to him, so he waited at the dock for his ship, the Andrea Doria, to arrive.
You are about to see the story of the Andrea Doria, her collision with the liner Stockholm, and of those who survived. This is a story of survival. For 8 days, the graceful ship has entertained her guests with parties and games, dining and dancing. Now, July 25th, the last day before reaching New York, the pace changes. Shortly before noon on this same day, 2 other ships are just beginning voyages. The 30-year-old Ile-de-France. Following close behind, the Swedish liner Stockholm. The Doria has, since 2:40 in the afternoon, been running in a heavy fog. Running at her top speed of 18 knots, the Stockholm is in clear weather. At 10:48, the Stockholm's radar picks up a blip. It is identified as an approaching ship, and its position is fixed at 12 miles and slightly to the right. By 11:03, 4 miles and closing fast. Minutes later, the officers of the Doria are horrified to see an oncoming ship loom up through a break in the fog. Captain Calamai orders all left and sounds 2 sharp blasts on his whistle. The warning signal for an emergency left turn, but the speeding ship skids ahead a half mile before starting to react. In desperation, the Swedish officer orders a hard turn to the right and full speed astern, but the fatal course is set. Seconds of the first SOS, ships all over the area are now heard answering the distress call. With nearly 2,500 lives in immediate peril, the largest peacetime sea rescue in history is underway. The Andrea Doria was due to arrive at Pier 84 at 9 a.m. For many, a long vigil is about to begin. The first survivors reach New York on the Ile-de-France, and for the next 18 hours they pour in on the 4 other rescue ships.
I was eventually picked up in a lifeboat by a freighter, and it was a harrowing experience. Yeah. I came into New York, and Jerry was at the dock to meet me, and he brought an Italian silk suit for me, thinking that I might have...
Want to look good.
Yeah, I might have wanted to look good. He threw his arms around me and he said, "Mike, you're alive. Thank heavens you're alive." And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Elvis did Hound Dog last week, and it's just came out and it's #1 already." Yeah. And I said, "That's groovy."
When Mike Stoller first heard the Elvis cover, he was disappointed. It just sounded terribly nervous, he said. Too fast, too white. But you know, after it sold 7 or 8 million records, it started to sound better. Prior to releasing his version, Presley's team approached Lion Music, who were the publishers of the song following the legal action in 1953, and purchased half of the publisher's share, or 25%, in Hound Dog. This was a common precondition for Elvis to release a song. On August 26, 1956, with the single racing up the charts, Johnny Otis signed an agreement that rescinded any claims to authorship or ownership of Hound Dog in return for just $750, which seems a little low considering that 2 years earlier he claimed to have co-written the song. By October 1956 it had sold 2 million copies, and Valjo Music Publishing, with whom Otis had signed an exclusive publishing deal, initiated legal proceedings, arguing that as Johnny Otis' exclusive publisher, they should be receiving a share of the revenue, despite Otis both signing the song to another publishing company and later rescinding his claims to authorship. Johnny Otis claimed that he only agreed to accept the $750 settlement when he realised that as Leiber and Stoller were under 21 years old when they made the agreement, they were legally minors and therefore not permitted to enter into legal contracts without a parent or legal guardian co-signing. He said that rather than the contracts being voided and receiving nothing, he decided to cut his losses and take the money. The case was heard by the Southern District of New York, who concluded Johnny Otis' ownership claims and his excuses for agreeing to drop his claims were unworthy of belief. They ruled in favour of Lion Music and Elvis Presley Music, and the publisher's share was divided between the two companies. The only thing Valjo received was their opponent's legal bill. Freddie Bell was responsible for most of the changes to the lyrics in Hound Dog that you can hear in Elvis's version, and he did try to get some co-writing credit, but this was denied as they had initially released their version as a straight cover and didn't have any permission to adapt the song.
So now, does the guy who changed the words get a cut?
Nothing, absolutely nothing.
Oh, there you go. Pretty good deal.
It was an unauthorized adaptation.
According to Wikipedia, the Elvis version topped the country, R&B and the pop charts at the same time, and remained at #1 on the pop charts for a record-breaking 11 weeks. A record that supposedly stood until Boyz II Men's End of the Road spent 14 weeks at #1 in 1992. The problem with that is, the Billboard Hot 100, the chart that Boyz II Men topped in 1992, started in 1958. Elvis released Hound Dog in 1956. Prior to the creation of the Hot 100, Billboard published a variety of different charts, based on radio plays, jukebox plays, and in-store sales. Some were genre-specific, and others were based on regions. Billboard references performance on the Best Sellers in Stores chart as the main chart before the Hot 100, even though the Hot 100 combined sales figures with airplay and jukebox data, and the Best Sellers in Stores chart was only sales. The closest thing to the Hot 100 before 1958 was the Top 100. This combined sales with radio and jukebox plays, similar to the Hot 100, and was published from November 1955. Elvis Presley's Hound Dog did top the bestseller in stores chart for 11 weeks, but it only reached #2 on the Top 100. However, its B-side, Don't Be Cruel, did reach #1 on the Top 100. So although Elvis's single was a #1 seller, it can't really be compared to a song that would later top a chart that didn't exist at the time. To date, Hound Dog has been covered over 250 times. The various versions have appeared in countless movies, TV shows, adverts and computer games. Far too many to recount. Both Big Mama Thornton and Elvis's versions are in the Grammy Hall of Fame, and the Elvis single was the first song that wasn't a Christmas song to sell more than 3 million copies. It's hard to calculate quite how much Leiber and Stoller or Elvis earned from Hound Dog, but for the songwriting duo and the artist that made it world famous, it served as a launchpad for their careers. Meanwhile, Willie Mae Thornton received just $500 for her single that sold around 750,000 copies. And despite a song she wrote, Ball and Chain, being a hit for Janis Joplin, Big Mama Thornton died in 1984 without really ever receiving the credit or financial rewards that she deserved. What do you think? Let me know in the comments and be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications for all the latest videos. And if you want to support the channel, there's a few ways you can do that. You can use the thanks button under each video to send a tip, or grab something from the merch shelf or store tab. There's t-shirts, hoodies, tote bags and cushions, all in a variety of colours and sizes. All profits go towards making new content and running this channel.